United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
No, there is not, Mr. Chair.
Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Next item is consent agenda. Approved minutes from last meeting. Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Public hearings, new business.
So tonight, our primary bit of business is a panel discussion with.
New business.
Oh,
Yeah, new business.
sorry. Meeting schedule. Direction was to amend our EDA schedule to be able to start at 5:30 for our panel discussions, to try and keep the meetings a little earlier. And council had indicated their availability as commissioners. So we do need to do it by resolution. So Brandon's prepared an updated schedule for the year for adoption by the EDA.
Motion to approve Resolution 2602.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, continued business.
All right. Now, as part of our strategic planning efforts for our economic development plan, the commission had indicated that they would like to speak to industry experts in various areas of development. And so tonight is the first in a series of panel discussions with industry experts talking about commercial and non-retail commercial and industrial development. We asked Ellers to help us enlist people that they were familiar with that would be able to speak authoritatively and with experience on the particular topic from different perspectives. And our Ellers staff will be facilitating the discussion tonight. So they'll be asking questions, and there will be an opportunity. It is intended to be less formal and interactive, and there'll also be an open-ended discussion portion at the end if we have time. And with that, I'll turn it over to Shane and Rebecca.
All right. Good evening. Oh, okay, there we go. Good evening, Rebecca Kurtz with Ellers, and with me, my coworker Shane Rudling. And as introduced, we're doing the first of a series of developer panels, and so it's our pleasure today with our three panelists. On the far, I'll start down there, is Tom Shaver. He is a partner at Inland Development Partners and brings over 40 years of experience in development. He works with clients and communities on, acquisitions, new developments, the agreements, and really from a start to finish idea to completion, as well as Inland also helps with securing financing and entitlements in that whole process. A couple of the larger maybe projects that you're familiar with from the commercial industrial side include Dayton 94 in Dayton, the Dean Lakes Corporate Center in Shakopee, and then Arbor Lakes Corporate Center in Maple Grove. Then going to the middle there is Nate Erickson. He is a co-founder at Stack Industrial. He has a lot of them have similar experience, I should say, which is why they are here this evening, but experience in working with companies across a diverse sector and including like the engineering, manufacturing, distribution, and life science sectors. With that, he's helped clients through, again, their acquisitions, different developments, the lease negotiations, relocations across a large range of industries. With some of the organizations that he's worked with include Danfoss, Banner Engineering, Shippers Supply, and Dolphin Industrial, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing all of those correctly.
Yep, you got it.
And then our third panelist is Phil Cantnoff from Opus. He is currently the president and chief executive officer. He started his commercial real estate career in 2004 with Opus as an associate, and over the years has continued to receive several promotions up to senior vice president and general manager, and then, like I said, currently serving as president and chief executive officer. During his years with Opus, he's completed more than 7 million square feet of industrial, office, and retail projects valued over $5 million, or $500 million, with a lot of high-profile clients. And of that, more than 3 million square feet are industrial space. So with that, and I will say, I know you guys have a lot more, but that is what I was able to pull off your bios. So, with that, I'm going to turn it over to my coworker Shane, and we'll start. But as introduced, we'd like to keep it casual. So if you have questions, I think everybody is open to making this as a discussion. If you have questions before the very end too.
Great. Thanks, Rebecca. Hello, I'm Shane Redlang with Ellers. Nice to see you all, and thanks again to our panelists for coming this evening. So we've got a list of questions that we'll walk through. We've got about an hour and a half to do it, so I'll do my best to make sure that we get through all of the material. But again, like Rebecca said, we want to keep this as informal, so if there's something that you guys want to focus in on and spend a little bit more time on, great. If you want to just let us walk through, that's also fine too. So whatever is your pleasure. But we'll start out kind of high level and just ask the panelists a little bit about the trends in commercial and industrial development in general. What are you guys seeing out there? What's hot in the market? What are the building types that are being built? What are the users that are still expanding? Noting that just this week there was an issue, I think it was Finance and Commerce, that I'm sure you guys all saw, that noted that industrial development may have cooled off a little bit over the past year, may be heading into a little bit less of a hot market that it's been in the last few years. But I don't know, Phil, do you want to start and we can just go down the line?
Certainly. Well, thanks again for the opportunity to be here tonight. I'll maybe apologize in advance too, because you want subject matter experts, and I'm not quite sure if I totally qualify for that. We've got a really talented team at Opus that unfortunately, they're all in Austin right now for an industrial conference. So they would be the ones that would be able to really give you the great specifics. But from a macro standpoint, just to give a geographic footprint, we're as far west as Phoenix, Denver, as far east as Charlotte, down in Austin, Texas, and then our headquarters is up here and scattering of offices in between. Right now, if you were to say, what is the pipeline that Opus is looking at, and I don't want to speak for the entire development industry, but I don't think we're too dissimilar to many others in that, where is the flow of demand and where is the flow of capital right now? Industrial development certainly is one of the most active spaces that is currently getting developed. That's a fundamental kind of drivenly by users expanding, the need for space. I think the very aggressive reshoring of manufacturing and logistical needs has all contributed to the demand for industrial space only continuing to grow. And then multifamily is probably the other very active asset categories. When we talk about asset categories, just think the different types of commercial real estate that's currently being taken place. And again, I understand we're focusing on more commercial and industrial for tonight. So there's maybe just a macro overset. And then to address that specific question that Shane brought up about, is the industrial market cooling off? Like anything, it's a little bit of a more localized story as far as where are we seeing things from a supply-demand fundamentals. Macro comment here, supply has, for all intents and purposes, started to get choked off. Demand has not gone away, but what we have experienced kind of from 2021, 22, kind of that in those initial years after COVID, where we really found that we still need stuff. Like, we can work from just about anywhere. People that are dialing in right now are able to hear the content and be a part of the conversation about physically being in the room. But we still need a place to live, and we still need stuff to get delivered. We like to go to the office. We like to go out to eat, but we don't have to. So those fundamentals, I think, have not changed. Now, what it is prone to doing is getting overbuilt. So we have seen some softening in certain markets. But all being said, particularly now bringing it here to the Twin Cities market, the industrial supply-demand fundamentals are some of the most healthy in the entire United States. Top 25 markets for the industrial space, the Twin Cities tends to probably be in that top 10 plus or minus, just from not from a size or just from a balance of what we call vacancy. And it always contends to be pretty disciplined as far as the developers here don't get too overbuilt. If you were to start looking down some of the other asset categories, just to take a moment on that, you probably all heard data centers have become a very hot topic. There's a lot of drivers for that. I think in the state of Minnesota, I don't know if it's been ratified, but we have a moratorium right now on doing more data centers, and I know that can be a lightning rod issue, but I will just say that across the country, data centers continue to be a demand driver for space. And then as you start to get into the other flavors of commercial development, non-retail specifically, look, office is having its moment. The downtown cores are continually kind of, I think, trying to figure out what is going to be the back to work. It's one of the biggest challenges big companies are facing right now is how are they going to bring their employees back? Do they want them all back? And are they going to be back full time? If I was to synthesize that down, Twin Cities in particular, we have more office than we have demand right now. I think we'll see addition by subtraction with some of these, what I'd say, dysfunctional or underinvested assets that frankly don't have a useful life in its current state through demolition, through repurposing. That's not going to be all the answers, but that's going to be some of it. But I would definitely say in summary, industrial and multifamily not only, I think, continue to be strong, but will continue to have demand drivers for those underlying fundamentals that I mentioned earlier. And certainly those have relevancy as we look across the Twin City landscape and most notably kind of here in the locale.
Hey there. Again, Nate Erickson here with Stack Industrial Partners. So I'm a broker, so I represent companies to buy, sell, and lease industrial properties. And so I work really with end users, but then also with landlords and developers that are looking to, find land sites, design buildings, and then ultimately lease those buildings to end users. And what I like to do is just to give you a little bit of some context as far as what the demand looks like today. So, pre-COVID, let's say 2015 to 2019, we were thinking it was a pretty good market, and that meant 5.5 to 6.5 million square feet of total demand, and there might have been 100 or 120 different companies looking for space. COVID hit. We benefited from many different things during the COVID years. But really demand in the Twin Cities jumped up to 15, sometimes 16 million square feet. So, you could call that tripling in demand. And a lot of that demand was coming from larger block users. So, Chewy.com was in the market for 700,000 square feet. Walmart was looking for 1 million. So you had a lot of those big outliers that we really weren't used to seeing. And so, in addition to that, even kind of your local mom and pop groups were trying to get out ahead of some of the supply chain issues. So they're taking on more space, taking on more product, because they didn't want to be, reliant on these kind of brittle supply chains, bringing in products from overseas. So went from a good market to an absolutely phenomenal market. And then I would say 2023, 2024, and so on, it was kind of more of a correcting market. So that came back down. Right now, we're probably at 9 to 10 million square feet of total demand. So we're still very much in a strong market for industrial development. It's still vastly exceeds pre-COVID levels, but it's more corrected, got into more of a reasonable range for demand. With that being said, of that 9 to 10 million square feet, probably about 50% of that is, north central, northwest focused in the Twin Cities. So think of Plymouth, Maple Grove, Brooklyn Park, Blaine, those types of cities. As we get down further into the Elko, Newmarket area, there's a couple soft spots, namely Shakopee is one of the biggest ones. In the mid-teens, they were kind of in their heyday. They were landing all sorts of deals, Amazon, Bayer Crop Science, Shutterfly. I think at the time, everyone was getting TIF. It was like, you get tax abatement, you get tax abatement. And it was great for a while there. And then, the last couple of years, it's been a pretty tough slog in Shakopee. There's probably a couple million square feet of vacancy down there. And, based on the amount of deals that have been getting done, there's probably a good 4 or 5 years of inventory on the shelf there in Shakopee. So that's obviously a piece that's affecting, the South Metro. There's plenty of vacancy there. But as you move further east, getting into Lakeville, Egan, it's a lot tighter markets over there. So I think that gives you a little bit of an overview of the Twin Cities market, and I'm sure we'll get into some more questions. But I'll kick it over to Tom here.
Hey, Nate, one quick question.
Yeah.
When you're throwing out those numbers in the first part of your comments, 8, 9 million, are you talking? Can you explain exactly what you're talking about there?
Yeah. So that's so we track active companies that are looking for space, and so you might have a company that is looking for 40 to 60,000 square feet. So it's very rarely are they saying, "Hey, we need 50," and that's it. It's typically a range. So that's we track. I think we have just over 100 tenants that are looking for space, and that's why I have that range there. As we're talking to brokers, and they're explaining what their requirement is. That's where that comes from. So
Total market size is like what, 3?
yeah, 360. Yeah, and that includes both multi-tenant space and then what we call owner-occupied buildings. So company XYZ owns their own building, occupies it, versus Opus developing a 250,000 square foot building and leasing it out to 3 or 4 tenants.
Yeah.
And is that demand regional, metro, Minnesota, statewide, or?
That's metro-wide. Yeah. So that's more of the 7-county metro area. Yep.
So if you say 10 million, at any given time, there's 10 million square feet of space being sought by various brokers.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. At any given moment in time.
Yeah.
So to speak.
And, it's somewhat, that's kind of the high level number. It's like, all right, 10 million, but a lot of those companies, they might be out there testing the market. They might be in the market for 50,000, but they're already in 50. So it's more, all right, we're out looking, we're shopping, we're coming up on a lease renewal, and then they end up renewing. So not all that 10 million is going to show up as in the absorption numbers for the market. So.
Thank you.
You talked about north-south. Just curious about the corridors. It seems to me that east-west corridor, the 494, all the way from east coast to west coast, is gaining more than we are here on the south side, where 35 basically terminates at Minneapolis. Is that a big deal?
It's really tough to add product along that stretch. I mean, that's what we would call infill. So anything within the 494, 694 loop around the cities, that's highly sought after both by investors, developers, and end users. Where we're seeing kind of the most development is likely kind of in the North Metro, and that's I'd say even in the Northwest along the 94 corridor, and that benefits from like Maple Grove and Brooklyn Park still have a lot of land within their city limits, and it's close to the 694 loop. You have a lot of population growth up there too, and that's one of the biggest drivers of industrial demand is where's the labor coming from, proximity to major thoroughfares. Those are probably the biggest components, and then just the availability of good functional real estate. So I would say, if there's good options within that loop, I mean, those are getting leased up a lot faster than, say, buildings that are in outer ring suburbs.
Thanks for having us. And these two gentlemen hit a lot of the high points. I just bring up a couple things. One, Rebecca, thank you for claiming it was 40-plus years. So if everybody's doing the math, when they start tearing down stuff that you've built, you know you've been in this a long time. And as I was driving down, one of the projects I worked on very early in my career as a broker when I first started was in Lakeville for Shopper Cosm, the cootie toy manufacturer, if everybody recalls that. But the better part of that story is the gentleman that closed down that facility. It took about 2 years to close down, and he was a wonderful gentleman. And one day he brought me into his office, and he said, "Hey, Tom, come in here. I've got to show you something." And he was a tinker. He's an engineer, and he developed out a shuffle machine that later became Shuffle Master. So it was a great story coming out of Lakeville. Shuffle Master, which all the casinos and everybody uses at this point, but it was a result of having 2 years of downtime, trying to move a 300,000 square foot facility in Air Lake at that point, and this goes back to the early 80s, which was a very emerging market. So if you equate how things progress in a community like the Twin Cities, using Air Lake as an example, at that point it was very hard to attract capital, but now Lakeville is very built out. I mean, as things continue to progress. But that was not quite 40 years ago, but almost 40 years ago that this was happening. So if you think about time frame, and you think about the market, and we hit on it, but I think one of the demand drivers is functional obsolescence, as I talk about the Shopper plant. That became single purpose, basically functionally obsolete. And so as we've progressed over time, warehouses, certainly in the industrial space, have changed their shape and function. And so as we build, it used to be, minimum of 24-foot clear, then it became 28, now it's 32, now it's growing to 40. So as people become more sophisticated in their warehousing and logistics, trying to build a facility that will take advantage of technology and cubic volume is probably better suited. So some of the industrial base that Neil had mentioned is becoming functionally obsolete. And I think you could qualify that 10 to 20% of the base is really functionally obsolete, which forces people to look for other alternatives. I appreciate you bringing up Shakopee, saying we've got 4 years of supply. I built into that market in this period of time of COVID, 2 buildings.
Beautiful buildings.
I appreciate that. That's always
Phenomenal.
great to build great buildings. But yeah, it was just under 400,000 square feet. And so delivered in 23, really sat in 24, sat in 25, but I'll say in the last quarter, we will be, by the end of Q2 of 26, we will be fully out, under lease. We're selling one of the buildings and fully out of lease. So this market moves at different points in time, and Shakopee is a relatively smaller market, but it's impacted by significant vacancy at any point in time. So it's one of those markets that will ebb and flow, like that. But I just wanted to point out the functionally obsolescence as a way of what are some of the demand drivers in this market. The other thing that we experienced, and this goes back into this kind of hot industrial market, was local aggregators of industrial space. And so what it afforded, if you think about Link or BlackRock, bought and accumulated a lot of different portfolios. Minneapolis is blessed with a lot of great developers. That was fragmented ownership, but groups like BlackRock and a couple others really aggregated the real estate and perfected the market. They saw an imbalance in terms of our rent structure versus what they were seeing nationally, which afforded us the opportunity to raise rent in pro forma. And so if you can probably opine on the rental market and how much it had increased from pre-COVID to where it is today, plus then the annual increases affords you the opportunity to build new. So in that respect, you also have then the rising prices that we're all associated with in the current environment, and certainly in the COVID era to the hot market and some of the inflationary factors we saw in what our build costs were. So quite a bit more expensive to build in the current environment, but it's now supported by the now new rents. And then I think as it relates to Elko new market, and it's really becomes a labor issue. And so a lot of these large companies looking to build new facility, real estate is only a fractional component of the SG&A. It might be 5 to 7% of the overall cost, but 65% is employment. And so using recruitment, retention, and having enough employment in labor base to be able to support these facilities is really critical. So, one of the things we were working on a build-a-suit just south here, and this was 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago in Dundas, large, it was 1.3 million square foot DC center. And unfortunately, it was not chosen because of the labor shed. Just couldn't attract enough labor to be able to support a distribution center of that size. And so the corporate client just said, we just can't facilitate and take that risk associated with labor. So I think labor is one of those key drivers, certainly as you look at your community, of how to address. And as we talked about, early on, the progression of the Twin Cities and households, rooftops, labor. You had mentioned the Northwest as a fairly significant labor force, but certainly, how does that evolve in the south area of the market? So they said everything else about the good part of the market, but I just thought those are the points I could potentially add.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah.
You talked about Shakopee. When it was starting to really flourish, do you think it was disproportionately subsidized by the incentives that had people looking there rather than other places? Or was it just a natural decision that happened to have some incentives go along with it?
No, good question. Very good question, Pop. And it was two factors. One, it was Shakopee was emerging. They knew they needed to use their tools, and whether it's abatement or tax financing was one. But then as it coupled with the infrastructure, the improvement along 169. These natural barriers in any community, you can look throughout the country, and the river post is just a natural barrier. It's just a log jam. But until the state and US 169 improved itself, it was a combination of both those factors. I wouldn't attribute it just to the TIF or abatement that was being provided to the company. It was really, I think, a stronger component of it was related to the infrastructure being brought in.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we've seen that in the office market too. Sometimes when a big user or users in this case go in and then they go away for whatever reason, just creates a vacuum that sucks up all the demand for a particular amount of time. And that's the other thing that's going on there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, no, infrastructure, as you talk about that, Shane, and Phil knows this project, City of Hopkins, and one of the things that they had done for this particular campus they were building that attracted Cargill, it was 1 million square feet of office, but they had to come in and front end the improvements to 169 Excelsior to be able to meet our timing. Had they not done that in advance of our delivery, our ability to attract Cargill as a build-a-suit for that 1 million square foot campus, they wouldn't have happened. So some of it's just timing. And now I'm talked about 169 infrastructure and Excelsior Boulevard infrastructure. So whatever you can do to the community to get in advance of that infrastructure, that lead time, afforded us the opportunity to do 1 million square feet. It was one of the largest projects ever done in Hopkins at that point.
Makes sense. Well, while you have the microphone, and you already touched on it a little bit, Tom, can you talk a little bit about, more specifically about the Elko New Market? What do you think could happen here, especially, even while you have the microphone, I'm just kind of looking at the time here too, on the sites that are next to the freeway and things like that, what do you think is going to happen? How fast will, I know you said it was a big question about how the South Market will do and whatnot, but what do you see happening in this area? You worked on a project in Dundas. Do you see more of that happening? Can you expand on that a little bit?
I do, and so I'll use an example. It's something that we're doing right now. And right before this, I was in a meeting. We're building. It's a build-a-suit. If people are familiar with build-a-suit for corporate client, it's known in the market. It's Michael Foods, Post Company, 250,000 square feet of freezer cooler in Jordan. And Jordan is a tertiary market. We would call Elko New Market tertiary to the major, but the attractiveness to it was one, land cost, two was incentives using TIF as a tool, and then three was its zoning. And so Shane, if you think about it, I couldn't build that in its adjoining community because of zoning, because Michael Foods and Post had mandated that it was IMP paneling. So these are freezer cooler buildings. They're 40-foot clear, IMP paneling is the most efficient and cost-effective product to build, but then also operate in. And many people are adverse to using any metal fabricated within their zoning code. So I encourage you, just using that specific example, to review code and say, all right, for particular purposes, in the case of Michael Foods Post, would we be willing to allow that to take place? But I think, to your question directly, it's probably going to be led by build-a-suit, trying to attract these clients using the tools that you have at your disposal, TIF, abatement, or others, and coupled with, kind of a aggressive community outreach to this corporate user, want to attract them, and then potentially front-ending some of the labor issues that may be in front of that as you're trying to make a decision if they're moving out of the metro area. Can you satisfy the labor component of it? But I see it led with build-a-suit, for the industrial side. And then it's your infrastructure surrounding it, making sure that that is in a capacity that, I, as the developer or owner of the facility, in leading the charge for a build-a-suit, have a clear path to my sewer, my water, my infrastructure, what are the fees, costs, and everything associated with it, so we can have an open dialogue, because it's a collaboration. It's with the client, but then also with the city and community, saying, here's what it's going to take to build in your community. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Nate, how about you on that same question? This market, what do you see? You vastly disagree with Tom, or do you agree?
No, I think Tom made some really good points. Just looking back at, say, the last year in the South Metro, I just made a tally of, there was 10 leases signed just up the road in Lakeville. And 70% of those were just in the kind of the 2,000 to, 20,000 square foot range. 3 of them were in, were a little bit larger, 20 to 40. And, I don't see Elko as a market that you go put up a spec building and then, try to land your, 50,000 square foot tenants plus. Just looking at, your kind of a sister community in Lakeville, Scanella has a big portion of land that they've controlled for many years now. And, they've landed some build-to-suits. QA1 was one of them. Schneiderman's, they came from Burnsville. Amazon was a big one, and then they put up 2 spec buildings, and those leased up relatively well. A couple of the tenants, Dawson, came from Bloomington. Outdoor Great Room came from Burnsville. So kind of real localized South Metro companies already. But they sat on a 20,000 square foot vacancy for probably 3 years. And it was an end cap space, so that's really the most desirable space in a building. And they finally leased it up with Caliber Collision. Another building that was recently built by Magnum Trucking, I think that was 180,000 square feet. They ended up selling that to a user out of Northfield, Advanced Exhaust Systems, I think it is AES. So, which I think was probably somewhat of a surprise, just based on, hey, building that, seeing a user just show up and take down the whole thing. We were involved with a build-a-suit with Sweet Harvest Foods. That was 360,000 square feet. They were already in Lakeville. So I think really your target market is, it's kind of the surrounding communities. You don't see a whole lot of companies that are moving from, Eden Prairie or Egan to Lakeville. And I guess if I were to say, if I was listing land down here, that's probably the focus that I would have, is more the build-to-suit. You have a nice, big tracts of land down here, especially that east side, having some of the infrastructure with the roads and, good highway visibility. And that's probably going to be, the best economics to make sense of a new development down here, is more the having that end user in tow versus kind of build it and they will come type of thing. So.
Thanks.
Yeah, probably the only other things I'd try to add on to that is, I agree wholeheartedly that a build-to-suit is going to be the most viable candidate for having activity take place. Tom mentioned a lot of it, but I think that clarity and certainty of what the path is to get from an idea to an entitlement and being able to have a permit, I can't understate the importance of that. Users have businesses, timelines, they have to be met. And if there's any confusion or uncertainty, that just, if there's one common denominator, I think with build-to-suits that are the most successful, economics matter certainly, but also that certainty of outcome is of equal and sometimes even greater importance. So the more prepared and ready to welcome a potential user in, and how do I say, the communities that tend to do really well with the build-to-suits are the ones that don't come in immediately and start saying, well, no, you can't do that. They can say, hey, let us work, let's find a way to make that work. I'll give some classic examples like the city of Cottage Grove. We've done a couple of build-to-suit projects down there. Down in Owatonna, we've done 2 build-to-suit projects down in Owatonna. And again, in both cases, if I was to distill down what are those uncommon denominators, was the city was very receptive, welcoming, and was looking to find solutions, not to say no. Knowing your capacity for sewage, for water, are huge. Power capacity right now is a huge driver. And then, some of the less maybe, sometimes they can be unexciting or maybe code violation nightmares, but like we hear the term outside storage and there's a lot of people that cringe on that. The groups that need it, they flat out need it. And I can understand it can be some challenges, but I've seen it, especially with new construction and working in collaboration with the city and the user, we can do these so that it's not becoming an eyesore. But these end users, they do really need it. And if you're unwilling to allow for that, then they're gonna, they're gonna go elsewhere. So I would say those are kind of some of the things that I would build on the themes that they had mentioned, as far as I think that's really how you can start to differentiate yourselves from build-to-suits. Without trying to be too critical, one of the frustrations or encouragements I've always had with the city of Lakeville is saying, hey, one of your challenges why we can't do more industrial here is you've pushed all your industrial zoning off of the freeway. And I know that they kind of look at me saying, well, if I wanted your opinion, Phil, I would have had you part of that. But I just tell them it does make an impact. And it's not because these industrial users need to have freeway visibility, but the old adage of saying, if I can't be going in a truck 50 miles per hour within 5 minutes of leaving the dock, it's not a great industrial site. And that is one of the challenges, in my humble opinion, that is limited. We've always been saying Lakeville is the next big move for a lot of industrial velocity to happen. And I just don't think it's totally materialized. And I do think some of that is just because they pushed a lot of that industrial zoning further away from the freeway. And it does just create, when you start putting up stoplights and adding additional traffic, that it just is a detriment to some of these users making those decisions. Because again, to Tom's point, the transportation costs and labor costs are the big drivers. It's the physical real estate itself is important, but it typically isn't that biggest cost driver.
Thanks, Phil. Well, about 3 minutes ago, I wrote down, why would industrial users or builders go to Elko New Market instead of Lakeville? And I think you answered that.
Well, and then probably the only other thing too, this is a statement of the blinding obvious, but I-35 is not going away, all right? And I don't think you can underestimate the importance of being on arguably the most significant transit node in the United States. And I know I started macro earlier, but I'll go back to that level. We have an office in Kansas City, and there is now the Canada, U.S., Mexico rail line that's going to happen with the headquarters sitting right there in Kansas City. That will not go away. And just along hand railing that whole way is 35, and that's coming right from Mexico all the way up to Canada. So it's not going to be today or tomorrow, but I will say that the importance of being on the biggest infrastructural node that you could be on I don't think can be understated. And that is, why would somebody be looking here? It's because of the fact that you've got large tracts of land. Yes, the labor is an issue. You could pull labor from Lakeville. I'll say that, one of the discussions that we've had with users that are looking in the South Metro is, do you try to go to Lakeville or do you go all the way down to Faribault, Owatonna, right? Where you just have a little bit more concentration of labor. So that's going to be the dynamic that you're going to be playing against. But the fundamental reality of I-35 is not going away, and that is I think a big deal.
You want a crazy idea, Shane, for why Elko New Market? Yeah, Phil, as you're touching on 35W is just such a node, and if you think, what is going to be changing in our environment in the next 10 to 20 years? And transportation, you look at it, and, Phil was talking about it, but the advent of, driverless trucking, what it's deployed, it's happening across the country. But what it needs is a drop-off facility so that it can pick up driver and bring it into the city, because they just don't trust that mechanics. But along 35W, connected and autonomous vehicle trucking is going to be a thing. And so, don't know if it's in the next, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, but it is going to be here. And so to take advantage of that opportunity in the interim period, as the community continues to grow and population base continues to grow, to support other commercial industrial, maybe there's an opportunity for it. I've thought about it a lot. It's just early in the thinking, but the calves are, it's happening. And so we think about our commercial properties as well, because parking fields are a big component of our office buildings, or multifamily buildings, or our industrial buildings. But as parking will shrink, probably not in my career lifetime, but certainly in most of yours, what can you do to repurpose those parking fields to something different? And knowing that connected and autonomous vehicle transportation is going to be here. So that's forward thinking, and how do you prepare for that as a community?
And Waymo signed a lease. I mean, Waymo's got 90,000 square feet leased. I mean, if you have Waymo, they're coming. I mean, you're going to see driverless cars coming to the community here, I think, in the very near future. I mean, they signed a lease, and it's a 3-year lease, so they're going to be here for a while. We'll see how those do in the snow. But if you haven't rented them, they're in Austin, they're in Phoenix. It's eerily comfortable. You're not going to get out on the freeway, but you don't have to tip. It takes you right there. It's pretty slick. I never say that to the Uber or Lyft drivers, because I want to make sure they drop me off, but
They have
Waymo is pretty slick.
They have several other requirements too
Yeah.
around the cities. I mean, I was talking with their broker, and he's got, they've got 5 other requirements around the Twin Cities. So, and they're in that 100,000 square foot. That's kind of like their larger platform. Then they have some other concepts that would be more in like the 30 to 50,000 square foot range that would kind of support those. So, to your point, I mean, that's just the toe in the water, and they've got plans, and they're working on several other locations. So, yeah.
So if you look at occupancies like that, it would seem to me that maybe they wouldn't generate the same tax base or economic activity in a city, because they're going to be more of just kind of a drop-off rather than an employment hub, or possibly even a costly improvement that would add to the tax base. Would that be an assumption that you would make, or is that just, because if we're looking at what could be very valuable because of the corridor that we're on, and we fill it up with something like that, unless you can get it into an interim use, is it better, and I know that's a hard question to answer, but is it better to look long-term and say, you know what, this would be nice to have, but if we want really long-term economic development and tax base, it may not be something we want to seek right now.
I mean, that's a good question. I appreciate, the question, because it is, one, if you think about related to outdoor storage in the core of the Twin Cities, it can go for a price per square foot higher than the actual warehouse facility. So this outdoor storage that's being taken place in the cities, and I know, Neil, you could probably cite many examples of where, just the ability to do outside trailer storage for this enhances the value of the real estate significantly. Is it, the interim use? And so if I, think through, and it's best through storytelling of, just given my duration, but, Phil's founder, Jerry Roundhorse bought, 215 acres in Plymouth, right on 169 from tenant companies and Bass Lake Road. It took 25 years to finish out that development. from the time that he bought it. And the last build-to-suit we did was a Select Comfort, probably back in 2008. So if you think about duration, how long are you willing to sit to wait for that to happen? And I use that example in Plymouth. You would see that as an inner ring suburban city, 215 acres, and you've got some tracks that are similar. But for, Opus at that point, 25 years later, until it got through all the inventory of land. Does that help put it in perspective? It always takes longer than you anticipate for the populace to grow. And so I would encourage you to be flexible enough to think about an interim use and, tax base to get to, the what we see happening in Lakeville for some of the inventory. It may be, 10 to 20 years before that happens. And so what do you want to do, Bob, in the interim period as a placeholder to allow that to happen? And I share the cab story as just one that we know it's happening. There are very few communities that are going to be willing to or have the land area to support that and also sit on an arterial. And if you think about, Waymo, and if you think about the personal side of it, and transportation, the fleet will need to go out at night, recharge, come back into the city. And so those are going to happen. And the land inventory within the inner ring of the Twin Cities area is all spoken for. So how is this going to be repurposed? So I just bring it up as an example.
There was a ULI session probably about 10 years ago. I don't know if any of you all went to it, but where they started talking about driverless cars. And I think all of us that were there, I think it was at the Science Museum, we walked out and we were like, oh, this is going to change things. And here we are 10 or 11 years. Everybody knows it's coming at some point. But in the life of real estate, it's certainly going to happen. So it's a good point and something to think about for sure. I think the labor force and the driverless car thing, if you will, could impact the outer ring areas as well, right? Like from a labor perspective, like if you don't have to actively drive your car and you live in Lakeville or Bloomington, would you work in Elko New Market and build-to-suit? I think, I don't know, if heads nod, I mean, that seems to be something that could impact these areas as well.
I mean, one of the biggest things I think we're seeing is a lot of users are becoming experts on labor study. I mean, we don't have to do hardly any of the work anymore when it comes to trying to prove up the labor studies because they've already done it before they even show up. So, I mean, again, and it's a broad world as far as trying to define those users. What I would say is that the groups that are net exporters for jobs, where people are having to leave the community to go to employment, they become kind of target-rich locations where groups maybe want to start focusing in on. I mean, we talked a little bit about Shakopee earlier. I mean, that was probably one of the things, Shakopee, there just wasn't a lot of employment base there, so there's a lot of people that were moving from, or not moving, but driving out of Shakopee to go to work. And obviously then once the infrastructure, as Tom mentioned, happened, a lot of groups saw the labor opportunity there and to plant the seeds there, and it I mean, in a pretty short amount of time, Shakopee really got developed, and then now we're slightly overdeveloped. So I would say that, to answer the question in a long-winded way of, if you've got the ability to, I mean, if you could stay in the community where you live and work right there, I mean, that's certainly going to be attractive. It has to be under the backdrop of saying, what are the competing employment opportunities for that community?
So again, zooming in even a little bit further, and you guys have touched on this, and so I don't want to belabor the point, but if there's anything else that you want to add to the question about, what does development really want? Talking about development as a person, so to speak, but I think you've touched on a lot of things, but if you want to just summarize kind of what do you think development really needs to happen in a particular location, particularly down here? Phil, do you want to start?
Having the ability to have some more just certainty in the macro economy, I think would be just a blinding statement of the obvious. That's number one. Number two, if Minneapolis could stay out of the headline news for maybe like more than 12 months, that would be a very good thing as well. Look, when I talked about earlier, capital is very fluid, okay? And when I say capital, I'm talking investors' dollars coming into areas. They are geographically unhinged as far as they don't have to invest in Minnesota, Minneapolis, Elko New Market. And I know that's probably a very straightforward statement, but it is, commercial real estate is a capital-intensive business. And when there is this uncertainty from a macroeconomic standpoint, it retracts people from making decisions, and those that are going to invest dollars into commercial real estate are going to go to the best of the best locations. And this is not a knock on any of Elko New Market. This is, I mean, Minneapolis, macro picture, as I mentioned earlier, we get offices all throughout the U.S., and every single one of our markets, there's compelling cases for where people want to be, but there just isn't a lot of activity that's happening with that uncertainty that's there. So I think you just have to recognize that with that macro overdrop, I mean, there just isn't as much thing. What does development want right now? It wants certainty. It wants some stability, as well as, I think, when inflationary costs are there, energy costs are spiking, it just eliminates people's willingness to make a lot of decisions. Now, Tom mentioned earlier on a build-to-suit, there are groups that are absolutely growing right now, and they have to make decisions. They're not going to enable some of these external factors that are beyond their control dictate how they're going to run their business. But by and large, the velocity of the market is slowing at this time. It's not going to be like this forever. Real estate is a cyclical industry. That being said, development, what it does want right now is also that, like I mentioned earlier, I think, that certainty. It wants a partner with where they're coming into, because they are making a big investment coming into communities. They're going to be a part of the fabric of the community. They're going to provide employment. They might provide some traffic. They may have some noise. There's a lot of neighbors that'll sometimes tell me how bad our developments are, and I politely understand. But at one point, when their house or their development was getting done, the other neighbors didn't like that either. So there is part of that construct of just saying, coming in with a welcoming, business-friendly response is going to, I think, be table stakes for getting groups, particularly of the build-to-suit flavor, excited about coming into an area.
All really great points. I think the only thing I would add is, I know data centers are like definitely not a great topic right now, but I think a lot of the companies that touch that industry are growing quite a bit. Just as a couple of examples, like Moss HVAC, States Manufacturing, both of those companies, took 500,000 square feet of space up in the Rogers-Dayton area. I mean, those size companies just don't come around that often, and that is just purely being driven by the data center world. We're seeing a lot of other companies touch that. We've worked with an electrical contractor that's doing something similar, where they're building out these data centers around the country, and they're absolutely blowing up. And that's something that kind of more high-tech manufacturing can be a little bit more palatable for cities, where it's not kind of a down and dirty industrial use. It's actually, it's pretty desirable. The jobs associated with those types of companies are good paying jobs that, can pay, those employees can buy a single family house. And that's probably what most of the housing stock is out here. I know that was a big challenge with Lakeville in getting companies to move down to Lakeville, is because they don't really have a whole lot of multifamily housing, which, to me, Lakeville is very desirable. They have high incomes, but it's kind of a bedroom community almost. You have a lot of people moving or driving elsewhere for jobs. So in a way, if you don't want to, fill up your city with, multifamily, really focusing on some of those buildings that will, and companies that are, being part of the future, part of this huge boom that we're seeing, without, having, you're not targeting data centers, but you're targeting the companies that are involved in that. So I think that's been a huge boon for the industrial world, and, probably a pretty decent fit for, the South Metro here. I don't know exactly how incentives could work on the city level, but at the state level, there's the Job Creation Fund, the JCF, and the Minnesota Investment Fund, which is more geared towards real estate, equipment purchases and whatnot. So, I mean, maybe that's something that you could look into as far as offering some incentives for companies to buy that automation equipment, because those are really expensive to acquire. But it's also, I don't really know of any other cities that are really leaning into that. They're more so looking at like the TIF, the tax abatement, based on like the property taxes. But I'm not sure how that would all work for you. But maybe the Ellers folks would figure that out for you.
I'll address it a little more tactically if you think about it. And so, Phil, Ed touched on it, but understanding your power capacity, so not necessarily data center related, but all industrial is requiring more power today, whether it's automated warehouse or what that is, or having the capability to do it. So whether it's Dakota or Excel, depending upon which area, and I think you're served by both, is that correct? So understanding, what the power capacity is coming into the industrial areas that you're focused on. The other is whether it's a mid-gas or center point, the gas. And then it's fiber infrastructure as well. Just understand the technology going into these is significant, despite the fact you might just think it's a warehouse component. The project that I was speaking to had a low voltage cabling budget of over $250,000 inside of a food storage, cold storage facility. So, those are real things. And so, and then the other thing is I talked about at the beginning of our discussion today, the clearance heights are growing. So as a result, the cubic volumes are growing. So therefore, the dependency for fire sprinkler and your water suppression and your capacity, your flow rate is critical for insurance capabilities. And so those are the things that would be impediments that would, we would have to, if we were bringing a user, come down with. But if you're ahead of that and can understand or deliver that to us, that you've got enough water capacity, knowing the flow rate to the site or what can be brought to the site. It might not be there today, but here's how we're going to deliver it to you, and here's the flow capacity. It's a significant component, and it might be, if you can't address it in the positive or the affirmative, it might be not considered as a site alternative, just because the ability to address that question is really your engineering department, and it could be the working with utility and things like that. So I'm just trying to be tactical of how to position Elko New Market to be able to react to an opportunity when it presents itself coming to the market, whether it's through Opus or me or one of Neil's clients, somebody coming in, that you've got some of the spade work done in front of it to make the path as easy and communicative as possible.
Great, thank you. So what do you think are some of the biggest mistakes that cities make, either their staff or from a planning level? What makes them good or bad to work with?
Well, given that I'm longest in the tooth and been around a lot of different cities, and Phil mentioned it, making it too cumbersome, and the clarity, and we view it as a collaboration. The project that we're doing in Jordan, Minnesota, with the city staff, the council, the planning commission, it was truly collaborative, and there are some creative components that are involved in that particular project that the city helped us overcome, through the tools that they had. And so I think it's incumbent just to make it as easy as possible and view it as a collaboration. And Phil said, a decision filter, I always use it in my business life. It's got to be a hell yes, otherwise I'm not going to do it. Otherwise it's a hell no. And so trying to get to a point where you've got this opportunity to say, it's a hell yes, we can do this, and the community is raising it. I'll give you an example, and it's better through story. We were dealing with a project in Robbinsdale, and we were building a grocery for Hy-Vee, and we were tearing down and demolishing, what was the Terrace Theater. And apparently everybody in the Twin Cities had their first kiss at the Terrace Theater, I learned. And so the PR was so bad that Hy-Vee, we were under contract, we had everything ready to go. But the CEO said, we're gonna pull the project. There's just too much backstory. And so it took a lot of effort, but ultimately the mayor of the community drove down to Iowa, said, I'm gonna meet with the CEO. I'm gonna tell him our community isn't coming out to Hy-Vee with pitchforks and no, everybody didn't have their first kiss and we were gonna do this. But it was the Terrace Mall, and it's not, you don't have these in your community, but I just share it through story. Yeah, it had been sitting fallow for over 15 years. It had been rated for its copper. It had mold throughout. There were trees growing on the roof, yet the community wanted to preserve it, but they didn't have a tool to preserve it or something. But that could have been an obstacle to attract Hy-Vee, which is a significant asset now to the city of Robbinsdale. So, yeah, trying to be in front of some of those stories, I share it as just an example of something that it took the mayor of the community to really just go in and say, we need this for our community.
Well, and maybe with that said, I mean, and it may not be a hell yes right off the bat. And so it's how do we get there? And it gets back to the creative problem solving and thinking through the stuff. But I totally appreciate that you guys appreciate, you know, where we sit in having to represent the cities that, and the residents and the individuals. So, you know, it's that open communication, the no surprises, but here's maybe what some of the questions, concerns, issues may be. You know, any tips, tricks, suggestions, or ways to, you know, put that out there ahead of time so that then, like, you know there's gonna be a natural tension there. Development sucks to a lot of people. They just don't want it, even if it is the best thing in the world. They're still gonna not want it. And, you know, we have to balance that appropriately, but also want to work through those issues.
It's a great question. I can address it. I think it starts through your existing zoning and ensuring, but then it goes to comp guidance. And how are you, as a community, sharing with the community what your long-term comp guidance is, so people aren't surprised and they're given a voice at that opportunity to share whether they support or do not support changing comp guidance, because I look and all developers look to its comp guidance to know if we're going to have this significant issue of a zoning issue, knowing that the community has already vetted that through. Obviously, nobody wants to have a development of the size of, Myco Foods in their backyard at 40-foot clear with a lot of truck traffic, but the guidance was already there. It had been in place for 10 years. So the neighborhood that had developed across the street that came in 8 years ago, well, the comp guidance was there before you bought. So, some of those issues and can be done in that capacity. Bill, we're going to mention something else.
Sometimes I think also as developers, we don't take into appreciation that, neighbors, they don't look at drawings on a regular basis. They don't see, how we look at the drawings. And one of the tips that I think we found that has been maybe the most dispelling of some of that anxiety is precedent images and actually giving examples of stuff that we've done that would be similar to what we're proposing. Doesn't mean it's going to be a perfect answer, but I think when you see it in a physical built condition as opposed to on paper, it will maybe take away some of that anxiety of the fear of the unknown. So I think that in and of itself, when we can come in and say, this is what our plan is, here are some precedent images, and if you want to see how this looks in the completed kind of actual operational state, here are some examples. And we have found that tends to, not always, but generally be a calming influence on some of that fear. The other part too, just kind of talking tactically too, I mean, Tom, you mentioned earlier, like as these clear heights start going, and this is where I always get a snicker from the architectural community, sometimes zoning, while it's best intended, like we want to have, you know, a bunch of class 1 materials like glass and brick. Well, you know, you have a 40-foot clear, your probably facades are now 45 to 50 feet tall. Look, I can't, these users can't sell a single more Twinkie if they got brick on the outside of their building versus an insulated metal panel. As much as I understand that can be, maybe beauty's in the eye of the beholder, I understand that, but on the same note, sometimes the zoning finish requirements get out of conformance with what's pragmatic with what these buildings need to be. And real example being, City of Cottage Grove, I mentioned earlier, we met with them early on when we were advancing a business park there, and we said, look, these are gonna be a problem from just a cost standpoint. And they said, well, they didn't even intend for it to be that way. And through meetings with the community and with staff, we were able to amend the code to allow for it to be what we would say is a lot more responsive to what you would think of like a modern industrial type looking building. There are other municipalities that they have a much more like, you know what, read it and this is what is going to happen. And I again, it's not a threat. It's just these users don't have to be in this certain community. They will move, and as much as we talked a little bit about incentives and stuff, I mean, the math does matter. And as much as I appreciate the incentives, I know that's part of the game, I also would say just the math has to work regardless with the incentives or not. If there are incentives, I'd like to think just about every developer that's asking for them, with Ellers being the ones that can validate it. I mean, it's not something that's like, well, geez, if I could get this, I can just put that in my pocket. It doesn't work that way. And I mean, in case of all of us here, our reputation is much more important than one single deal. If I get an extra nickel on one deal because I took advantage of a situation with the city, I can tell you this much: the founder of Opus he says, if you can't say that on the 10 o'clock news in front of your grandpa and grandma, and you wouldn't be embarrassed about it, you better not do it. So, so those are just some simple things I'd like to point out that's where, those are the tips and the tricks of saying, as groups come in, we talked about a little bit earlier, like, if you're gonna tell me I have to have brick and glass on my 45-foot facades for a freezer cooler building, I can't make it work. I'll have to go somewhere else.
Elaborate on one point, but I think it's you know, Josh, your question, you know, what can we do? And, yeah, we talk about the tool of TIF. It's such a misunderstood tool. You know, I've chaired our Housing Redevelopment Authority for our community for 20 years. So we've used the tool very effectively. If the community wants to use its tool, the educational component of it to truly understand how it impacts the overall tax base is critical. I'm not advocating whether you use this tool or not, but I've seen it used very effectively, and the most effective it's brought forth in the educational process to the community, because in most cases, it's a misunderstood tool. And so if you decide to do it, one of the things that you could do is to front end some of that communication, very similar to comp guidance of, all right, here's what tax agreement financing is, and we've used Ellers in our community to put on educational seminars to the citizenry to truly understand what it is. So just to add on to what Phil was saying.
I've got some experience with the Cottage Grove Business at Breakfast event, and I've thought I don't really know of any other city that's doing that, and they do it I think twice a year, and they invite all the businesses in their community. They invite the brokerage community, development community, their EDA is their mayor, city administrator, and it's really just an open dialogue as far as what's going on with the city, some highway improvement projects, infrastructure projects, and I've attended those several times, and I've always admired just the way that they kind of interact with their business community. It's a very open dialogue. It's not like a formal city council. It's more of it's a breakfast. It's kind of a little mixer in the morning. They got breakfast. They got a little presentation of what's going on. And I think if that were coupled with kind of a package that's developed by the city saying, hey, we got this industrial, we got several hundred acres along 35. here's the rollout for what's going on. So it's a lot more top of mind, because somebody driving down the road is, all right, there's a farm field over there. The east side looks a little bit more developed, but you know, what's going on there. So just that awareness, and then, you know, we're all people, and it's just, you're working with other people, and it's having those conversations. And now I'm, you know, working on a project down there, you know, pretty sizable build to suit, and it's like, you know, that was just kind of the catalyst to really developing that relationship. And that's kind of, we always say real estate's a relationship business, and that it truly is the case. So I'd say, it's not a super heavy lift. You know, it's one or two times a year that you could do something like that. So I've great feedback from that event. So.
Question on that is, I work in the bank here. We talk as bankers. You guys probably talk as developers. How do we build our reputation for the conversation to say, boy, I talked to Elko Newmarket, and that's the place to go look at? Because my sense is that in your community, there are conversations between other, you get a reputation, right? Mm-hmm. What can we do to, I didn't mean to cut in on your questions, but what can we do from your perspective to build that reputation of confidence that if you come here, you're going to get serviced right and it's going to work?
And but forgive me, I don't know like the specifics on the project, but I mean, didn't Niagara Bottling just go over there? And again, if that's maybe something that the community hated or you all don't like, I apologize. But I mean, to me, the best way to do it is to physically show it off and say, here's a group that came in. If it was a good experience, they had clarity, they got what, it worked out well for everyone. There's no better, in my mind, opportunity to show than a tangible example of it. And that's how I think you can really reinforce the narrative. You'd be amazed how happy a lot of users are to show off their brand new space. They love, when we did a cardboard box manufacturing, don't call it that. It's a corrugated sheet manufacturer, but it's cardboard. But never say that in front of them. But they were so excited to show off how they made cardboard, corrugated sheets in their facility. And I almost felt bad a few times, like, hey, we got the group that wants to come in because they're looking at, bring them in, and they love showing it off. So I don't know what the relationship's like, but that can be some of the most powerful reinforcement of Elko knows what they're doing. They got this complicated deal done. The user's in, they're happy. It's meeting everything they need. I think that, to me, would be the most powerful message to reinforce that Elko's open and willing to bring in business.
No, Commissioner, your question is right on point, so appreciate the comments, and by all means, we've got about 15 minutes left. I do want to talk about the interchange, but I really do, want to make sure that you all get your questions answered too, even staff, if there is anything. So I'll just take a pause quick, just to make sure everybody's getting what they need out of this so far.
But, I got several, but the interchange was one of them. So, I think that is an important piece. As you guys came off, it isn't ideal. And so how much of a barrier is the interchange now? And/or, there's an opportunity we continue to do more development. It's going to force the state, the feds, and others and the counties, for all of us to work together to get that fixed. So it's chicken and egg type of thing potentially, but is it that big of a barrier? And/or, you get a potential developer coming in, you can have a say in how this interchange looks, works, feels for your future development. And then maybe on transportation, 35 sucks, and I would give anything to have opportunities to not go further north than I already do. It was before it was don't cross the river. I would love to stay south of McStop now, because I'm in traffic for an hour just to get past, Burnsville. Can we leverage some of those bottlenecks like 169 was back in the day? 35 is now, and it's only going to get worse when 50 gets redone, and then we add lanes on 35. It's going to be a mess for a handful of years. But that could encourage that labor market from Northfield and south that still do travel north to stay down here, and we could leverage that as an opportunity that somebody sees that vision.
Well, I'll maybe just hit one. You do have an interchange, so I do think that like cannot be understated. Yes, at least you have one. It's better than not. So, yes, getting it improved will help, but in my candid opinion right now, it's not a detriment. I don't think people are not going here because of the interchange. You've got industrial guided, my opinion, industrial guided land immediately off the interchange, which is the right spot for it. And then you talk a little bit about the transportation, and I mean, if it's any misery loves company, traffic sucks everywhere right now. I mean, 494 is an absolute disaster. So it seems like MnDOT has figured out a way to get everything under construction at the same time and get nothing done. That being said, I mean, one of the most clever, I'm biased when I say this because we did the deal, but we did a build-a-suit for Bosch down in Owatonna, and they have a billboard up that says, "Tired of sitting in traffic? Come work at Bosch. You wouldn't be in traffic right now." And I see it every time because I go down to Mankato to duck hunt. But anyway, so I look at that. I mean, that is something that you could use as an attraction. It's going to be temporary would be my only cautionary piece. I mean, as much as I continue to say, even with the traffic, the 35 is I think just the game changer for this entire area because of how much transit has to go through there.
I think a great example is 70 up in Lakeville. I mean, you see just the transformation with that interchange and how much retail and, Walmart, and you got the Compeer Financial and all those various companies moving in there. To Phil's point, I don't think that necessarily, that's the key to getting somebody to come here, but it certainly would be a great way to kind of dispel any kind of concerns about accessibility. I mean, that's a major factor for industrial because they're 53-foot trailers, going in and out every single day. So, I think that would definitely help. It's just the big question is when. It's like, are you too early? It's kind of like being wrong. It's like if you're way too early, it's like it's probably really not the right decision. Based on how you fund that, but I would imagine there's probably that'd be more of like a federal funding mechanism that would have to you'd have to have something like that in place. But overall, accessibility is a huge decision point. So,
when I saw the question, Shane, relative to the interchange, Phil qualified it, I think best. You have one, which is a great start. If I think about a project or a community that we recently developed in Dayton, Minnesota, in between Maple Grove and Rogers, the new Dayton interchange that they put in exploded development. I think there was over 3.5 million square feet built in a span of probably 2.5 years in that particular market as a result of that interchange opening up. So it does tell you that interchange or industrial is directly related to logistics. And so therefore, I think you've got the path already set out. In thinking through the question further in anticipation of our conversation tonight, one of the things are, where are going to be the traffic failures relative to the areas that you've got earmarked for industrial? Where do you need to be sensitive, to any failure conditions, or where will the county allow for access points along CSAH 2, how this is going to impact, and try to be in front of that, because ultimately we'll be, and our entitlement will be subject to traffic. So maybe some early traffic engineering with some modeling of, density built into, these, assuming traditional industrial. You're never going to be exactly right, but at least you can understand where and what traffic patterning is going to be to potentially offset or identify where those failures are going to be within the system. As we talk about, whether it's a sewer or water, traffic is one of those systems that I think to get in front of that, to create a clear path for a developer would be helpful.
And the lead time on that Brockton interchange, I mean, that had to have been 5 years plus to get something done. So it's definitely get out in front of that and
I have a question. Do you see more of demand with multi-use industrial buildings or the single, like, I mean, for example, here, where would you say is, what should we be looking more for? That single use or the?
I'll address it, but I think on the brokerage side, just given the fact I've been out of it for so long, he's probably got a better answer than I do, but I'll take a stab first and then you dovetail on it. So as we talk about the build-to-suit is for a single use, and I think that's where you'll see a majority of the activity, and it would be in an ownership position, but that might not be, as I described, the Post or Michael Foods, 250,000 square feet. It might be a 30, 40,000 square foot, opportunity. And so it does, relative to that size, and the user base is probably, the Twin Cities as a whole has more users of the size of 10 to 40,000 square feet than it does 200 to 500,000 square feet. So you're appealing to a larger base and some of the manufacturing and people that will be down here. From a speculative market, when you're working in a multi-tenant industrial building, typically that would mean that you're attracting development capital to do a speculative office warehouse. They might have a portion of it filled, but to do that, Phil mentioned that the capital is just not there to be able to get the debt or the equity to be able to do multi-tenant in this particular market yet. And I'll share an example. St. Michael, we were working on a project in St. Michael, a great community. They had forefronted a lot of the infrastructure, but and this was probably due to timing, but we couldn't raise the debt and equity for a speculative building that was scheduled in St. Michael. One, it wasn't necessarily in Maple Grove, Dayton, or Rogers. It was just 4 miles to the north, but sometimes that matters. It was not necessarily right on an interchange, but that institutional capital, as Phil quantified, is particular to the industrial multi-tenant environment that you're talking about.
Yeah, I would just add, the closest industrial product here is just up the road in Lakeville, and I would say the vast majority of those buildings there are owner-occupied type buildings. It wasn't until 10 years ago where Scannell started developing some significant industrial, multi-tenant buildings. So I think you have a lot of business ownership, particularly in this area, Credit River, Lakeville area, where a lot of those companies, they like to own and occupy their own real estate. The biggest hurdle to that, especially if you're looking in this area, is, if you're going to go build, say, 20,000 square feet or 50,000 square feet, the price per square foot is just so great that you just don't see a whole lot of that being done. With your typical construction materials, your tilt-up panel concrete buildings. That's where some of the cities that are more open to different construction materials, like engineered metal buildings or some of the other materials that you're talking about, Tom, where those types of buildings are a lot more attainable and they make a lot more sense to go build something brand new. The multi-tenant space in this deep South Metro is I would say a lot more limited than other parts of the metro.
I have a question. You mentioned, or you all kind of mentioned at the beginning of the presentations, that the availability of labor is one of the really key components in addition to logistics location. Have you seen cities going out and doing labor market studies or analysis as a way to market their communities? And if so, what tools are used or companies are used to conduct those studies?
I don't know.
Yeah.
We just get to take
Tom?
care of it.
Well, I think, one of the houses that we've used for labor shed, and different companies specialize in this, but CBRE was the one that had a good labor group. And so one of the national brokerage houses, typically they have a subcomponent of what their deliverables are for producing labor studies. And I'm sure through Shane or Rebecca, they'll have people that they could help facilitate that for you as well. But I do encourage you to really understand what this obstacle is, so you can quantify it for the community and for yourself to see how it will either enhance or detract from your ability to gain these users.
And then, next is maybe not a question, maybe it's just a comment, but you all talked about businesses maybe even moving from like the Burnsville area, needing to expand or moving out to Lakeville or Faribault and Owatonna. It seems like we're a donut hole. I felt like I heard that a little bit repetitively, like why are we being jumped over? I do feel like we have a can-do attitude. We've demonstrated our ability to deliver really difficult projects, probably equally difficult to a data center at this point, and get it done. And we're closer to the metro, and I don't know, I'm curious why
The why.
we're getting skipped over.
And maybe I'll add on to that a little bit, because that was one of my other pieces, like, I think it was you, Nate, saying something about Kansas City or whatever. I mean, as I'm driving down 35, I'm thinking about why don't we attract places or businesses from Albert Lee, Mason City, Ames, Des Moines, Kansas City, on that I-35 corridor. We could be, I mean, not just here in the local metro attracting, but like they want to expand, they got a corporate office in Kansas City, or they got a corporate office in Des Moines, and they don't want to, have distribution centers all over the place, or that they don't have anything, so they're trucking it up. I mean, we should be attracting, and I think to Renee's point, willingness to get creative, and maybe we're just not big enough yet. We're not there yet, and we're too idealistic in thinking that way, but.
Go ahead, Phil.
I could offer just kind of a perspective. I understand the sentiment. I think we have, as you look at the macro logistical nodes within the United States, we mentioned Kansas City, mentioned Des Moines, Chicago being, a huge industrial hub. Look, the Twin Cities has just never really been a distribution market. We're kind of what we like to say at the end of the cul-de-sac. There's not a lot of population basis north of the Twin Cities, west of the Twin Cities. You can service a lot of the major metropolitan areas, frankly, more conveniently in Des Moines, Kansas City, Chicago, than you can from the Twin Cities. Doesn't mean it's flawed or wrong. I'm just saying right now, I mean, if you look at the infrastructure of our industrial base across the Twin Cities, you mentioned earlier, they put 1 million square feet up in Dayton, and I think a lot of us were kind of looking at each other like, well, that's when you're getting long in the cycle, when the out-of-town developers come in and start putting up the product. That's not what we're known for, and that struggled. I think, just to be candid, it's not the right product for this market. Not that it was a bad building, it's just not the typical user profile. I mean, Tom, you said it well. I mean, the vast majority of our tenants in industrial space right now are in that, 10 to 40,000 square feet. So I appreciate what you're saying. I think what ends up happening is the combination of where businesses have made investments, and even like if you just look in the 7-county metro, West Metro tends to be probably the more active side of the Twin Cities. Northwest, as we mentioned earlier, the Southwest certainly had its period of time. Shakopee maybe got a little bit overbuilt, but there's still a pretty big industrial base there. It's hard to pull a user, though, from the West Metro over to the East Metro and vice versa. So there are just some, where's the existing, I mean, one of the things, as much as I appreciate like the labor study that you asked earlier, one of the biggest things that we always try to figure out is what's the current scattergram of that group if they're looking to relocate, because where is their employment base at? If they're all kind of centric to the West Metro and we have a site over in the East Metro, I think we're wasting our time trying to convince them that you're going to move everyone over there. So again, I think it really is from in my mind, again, you've got that great example of a group that came in, complicated, sophisticated building that you were able to deliver on, and that's the type of probably profile that you're going to be looking for. Somebody that wants the adjacency to the Twin Cities, maybe can pull some labor from the Faribault, Owatonna markets, but on the same note, needs maybe some of that space, some of that certainty of outcome that candidly they're not going to be able to get as readily in some other communities along 35, especially the further north you get. Further south you get, I mean, that's, I don't think you're seeing much until you get down to Faribault. So you do have, and you're kind of right now at the edge. I don't think you've been intentionally getting jumped over. I just think that the demand drivers haven't quite manifested themselves to get completely here.
Yeah, and maybe the key takeaway is, like you said, then the 10 leases signed in the last year in Lakeville were between 2 and 40,000 square feet. So maybe we're in the market for smaller businesses.
Yeah, I mean, the owner occupier buildings are the ones that I think, tend to be a driver. The problem is just the cost per square foot's pretty heavy. And again, I know that as much as we'd love to say you could put spec up here and then you could have, a lower cost basis in your building because you're putting up 100,000 square feet versus 20. Problem right now is just that you're not just going to get the financing as well as the depth of the tenant drive is what is going to make it difficult for somebody to underwrite or get confident that, yeah, I can put that up and I can lease that up within a reasonable period of time for my business plan.
I'll just have one more, comment, Renee, and I really appreciate your question, because you've got all the tools, the question why, and what I would look at in Lakeville, what was the catalyst that afforded Air Lake to start? What were the companies? I mentioned the Shopper Cosm, but that was built in the 70s, I think it was 75. So if you think about the maturation of that particular market, it was seeded back in 1975 with a very large manufacturing group. If I think about Owatonna, Wenger Corporation, long time, significant employer in Owatonna market. And so that maturation of that seed company that decided to start in Owatonna allowed that market to continue to expand. That's one example, just because I know Wenger. But those are things to give yourself grace. All right, what is going to be our catalyst? And Phil's pointed out, well, we've done this difficult. How do we really applaud that to the market, showcase it to the market, and really use that as our seed to continue to enhance? So take time. I just give yourself, some grace. This is hard, but it's time.
Well, and I think part of too, as we go into 2040 comp planning stuff too, that comp guidance piece and making sure that there's clarity on that. And before we do some of that, really heavy lifting work with it, do we have it built into the process where we solicit feedback from developers and others to say, hey, these are the parts of the comp plan right now that could use some clarification, some tweaks, or these are non-starters for this part of development or something. So if that's not already in there, something that we should think about incorporating into that process.
I think a good question to ask is just, what do you want to be? And what type of companies, what type of jobs do you want in the city? And, it's all about outreach, being visible. It's no different than my job filling space. It's and being relevant. So, I mean, there's tons of industry associations that you can have a representative from the city to be involved in. There's, for the real estate perspective, there's NIOP, there's MNCAR, there's ULI. On the end user front, there's MPMA, the Minnesota Precision Manufacturers Association, and just having some visibility so that company owners, think of you when it comes time to making a move. But I think you can really define, what the profile of the type of company that you want in the city, and then really direct your EDA to have direct outreach to those companies and to those associations. I think that'd be a great benefit.
So I know we're a little after 7:30, and I know you guys have a council meeting too to get going to, but I think it was a good discussion. I hope it provided some things to think about as you're moving forward, and I want to thank the three of you for joining us and sharing all your expertise and advice on what can be done and the opportunities that are here. So with that, unless you have anything else, Tom?
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So moved.
Second.
Aye.